The room fell silent the moment the lawyer stopped speaking. Ethan Carter felt it before he understood it, the kind of silence that warns you something is about to break. The office was elegant, expensive, and cold, with tall windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Morning light spilled across the table, but it didn't warm the tension sitting in the air. This meeting was supposed to be simple, was supposed to be closure. Ethan had spent most of his life preparing for moments like this: boardrooms, contracts, quiet power. He had earned his place step by step, year by year. And yet, as he sat there in his tailored suit, he felt like that lost 11-year-old boy. Again, standing in a stranger's house, wondering if he truly belonged. Across the table sat his aunt, Margaret Holloway. She looked calm, perfect, even her gray hair was neatly styled, pearls resting against her neck like armor. She folded her hands and smiled politely, the kind of smile people used when they were about to say something sharp but wanted to seem kind. The lawyer cleared his throat. As per the will of the late Richard Carter, ownership of Carter and Holloway Industries will be distributed according to before that. Margaret said smoothly, cutting him off. I need to say something. Ethan's eyes lifted too. His chest tightened. Margaret turned slightly toward him, her voice soft, controlled. This company has always been a family legacy. It was built by blood, sacrifice, and shared history. She paused, choosing her words carefully. An inheritance, she continued, should remain with real family. The words landed like a quiet explosion. Ethan didn't react right. Away he felt frozen, like his mind needed a second to catch up with what his heart already understood. Not me. Margaret looked directly at him now. You were welcomed into this family, Ethan, but let's not pretend that makes you the same. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Holloway, legally speaking, I know the law, she said, her tone firm but calm. But I also know what my brother-in-law would have wanted. Ethan's hands clenched under the table. Richard Carter had been the closest thing Ethan ever had to a father after his parents died in a car accident. Richard never treated him like an outsider, never used the word adopted like a distance. He had simply said, "You're home now," and Ethan believed him. For years, Ethan worked harder than anyone else in the company. He arrived early, left late, took responsibility. When others didn't, he carried the company through difficult times, helped expand it, modernize it, protect it. He didn't do it to prove himself. He did it because he loved it, because it felt like family. Ethan owns 42% of the company, the lawyer said carefully. He is the largest individual shareholder. Margaret's smile didn't disappear, but it hardened. Paper doesn't change truth. Ethan finally spoke. His voice was steady, but quiet. And what truth is that? She hesitated for just a moment. That legacy isn't something you earn, something you're born into. The words cut deeper than any insult. No shouting followed, no dramatic argument. The meeting ended. Quickly after that, like everyone was afraid of staying too long in the discomfort. Chairs moved, papers were gathered. Margaret stood and left without another look at Ethan. As the door closed behind her, Ethan stayed seated. The room felt empty. Now too big. He stared at the spot where his uncle should have been sitting. He imagined Richard's warm voice, his calm advice, his belief in him. And suddenly grief returned, not loud, but heavy. Someone else was still in the room. Claire Bennett stood near the window, holding her tablet to her chest. She hadn't spoken during the meeting, but she had seen everything. She worked closely with Ethan, knew his work, his character, his quiet sense of fairness. She walked closer. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Ethan looked up at her. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were tired. "You don't need to be." She shouldn't have said that. He gave a small, tired smile. "People say what they believe when they think they're winning." Claire hesitated. "And what do you believe?" Ethan stood, adjusting his jacket. "I believe this isn't really about money." She studied him, noticing how calm he seemed despite everything. Then what is it about? He met her gaze. Belonging. That night, Ethan returned to the old Carter house. He hadn't planned to. Something pulled him there, a need for answers, or maybe just silence. The house was dark, quiet, untouched since his uncle passed. He walked through familiar rooms, memories rising uninvited. Late dinners, laughter, advice given over coffee. A man who chose him without hesitation. Up in the attic, while searching for old documents, Ethan found a small wooden box. His name was written on it in faded ink. His heart began to race. Inside were letters, all from Richard. Ethan sat on the floor and began to read. Each letter felt like a conversation reaching across time. Richard wrote about the company, about his worries, about Margaret's rigid beliefs. One letter made Ethan stop breathing. If anything happens to me, Richard had written, Ethan must be protected. He understands this business better than anyone. He leads with heart, not pride. That matters more than blood. Ethan closed his eyes. Tears came quietly. For the first time since the meeting, something inside him settled. Margaret's words no longer echoed as loudly. Richard's voice replaced them. The next morning, Ethan walked into the office with purpose. Margaret was already there. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. I assume you've had time to think. I have, Ethan said. He placed the letters on the table between them. Her eyes flickered as she recognized the handwriting. I'm not here to fight, Ethan continued. I'm here to honor what your brother-in-law built. Margaret said nothing. Outside the office, Claire waited. She watched the closed door, unaware that this confrontation would change everything, not just the company, but the lives connected to it, because Margaret had drawn a line between blood and belonging. And Ethan was about to prove that family was never about blood at all. The rain fell in steady sheets the night Ethan found the letters. It was the kind of rain that made streets glisten and cars splash as they passed. But inside the quiet of the Carter house attic, it felt like the world had stopped. Ethan sat, cross-legged on the wooden floor, the small box open before him, the faint smell of aged paper filling the air. His fingers trembled as he picked up the first letter, written in the neat, precise handwriting of Richard Carter, the man who had taken him in when the world had abandoned him. Ethan had never expected to find anything like this. He had come to the attic seeking only old documents, maybe tax papers or company records. Instead, he discovered a piece of his own history, proof that the man who had believed in him, trusted him, and made him part of the family had left something far more personal than money or titles. The letters spoke of Richard's regrets, hopes, and unwavering trust in Ethan. Each page revealed a side of his uncle that Ethan had never fully grasped. Not just a business titan, but a man deeply aware of human nature, capable of generosity and foresight. As Ethan read, he felt something stir inside him, a combination of grief, gratitude, and determination. Then he found the one letter that changed everything. If anything happens to me, Ethan must be protected. Margaret will never accept him. But this company belongs to the one who understands it, not the one who demands it. Let him lead with heart. Let him choose wisely who stands beside him. Ethan's hands gripped the edges of the letter. The words were simple, yet their weight was immense. His uncle had trusted him completely, even when others doubted him. For the first time since Margaret had publicly questioned his place in the family business, Ethan felt a surge of clarity. The path forward was no longer about proving himself to her or to anyone else. It was about honoring the trust placed in him. The next morning, the city felt different. Chicago's skyline gleamed under a pale sun, and the streets buzzed with their usual energy. Ethan arrived at the office earlier than usual, purposeful and focused. He carried the letters carefully, placed in a folder knowing they would be essential for what was coming. Margaret was already there. She looked up as he entered, her expression as controlled as ever. Her poised demeanor, The pearl necklace, the quiet authority all of it, was meant to intimidate. Ethan had faced that before, and he would face it again. But today he felt something else. Certainty. "I assume you've had time to reflect?" she said smoothly, her voice calm but edged with expectation. Ethan didn't hesitate. He placed the letters on the polished table between them. "I have," he said simply. Margaret glanced at the top letter, her eyes narrowing slightly as recognition dawned. "And what exactly are you hoping to prove with those?" she asked, attempting to mask her unease with curiosity. "I'm not here to prove anything to you," Ethan replied, his tone steady. "I'm here to ensure that Richard's vision is honored. Not just the business, but the integrity of what he built, and the people who truly understand it." The room was silent for a long moment. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had always been confident, unwavering in her beliefs that blood determined belonging. But here was evidence that challenged everything she stood for, proof that Richard had made a deliberate choice to place trust in Ethan. Despite what Margaret thought, the board meeting that followed was tense but decisive. Margaret presented her argument with precision and grace, as always. She spoke of tradition, family legacy, and the sanctity of bloodlines. But when it came time for votes, the letters were presented and the reality became undeniable. Ethan's leadership, his experience, and his uncle's explicit wishes outweighed any claim of heritage. Ethan retained his position as the major shareholder. Margaret resigned gracefully, though the subtle tension in her smile betrayed disappointment. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Victory was not about proving her wrong. It was about moving forward with integrity, honoring Richard, and taking responsibility for the future. In the days that followed, Ethan immersed himself in the company with renewed focus. Claire Bennett, who had quietly supported him during the initial confrontation, stayed close. She helped him navigate the corporate nuances, prepared reports, and reviewed strategies late into the evening. There was an unspoken bond forming between them, one built not on flashy romance, but on mutual respect, shared challenges, and emotional honesty. They began spending more time together outside the office as well. Walks through the city, quiet dinners, and long conversations over coffee created a connection that was gentle yet intense. Claire understood Ethan's vulnerabilities, his hopes, and his quiet resilience. She saw the man who had carried grief, responsibility, and loyalty silently for years, and she admired him more deeply for it. One evening, as they stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in Ethan's office, watching the city lights reflect off the wet streets, Claire spoke softly. "You know," she said, "family isn't always who gives you blood. Sometimes it's who chooses to stand by you, who believes in you, and who shows up when it matters." Ethan looked at her, feeling the weight of those words. Margaret had tried to define family for him, to place limits on his belonging. But Claire's words reminded him that family could also be chosen. It could be people who trusted him, who supported him, who encouraged him to be more than he thought he could be. He realized something he hadn't admitted before. For years, he had carried the fear of rejection, the fear of never being fully accepted. Margaret's earlier words had reopened that wound, but the letters and Claire's support helped him heal. He felt a quiet strength that wasn't just about business acumen or legal rights. It was about the relationships he had built and the trust he had earned. The months that followed were transformative. Ethan implemented Richard's plans, modernized operations, and strengthened the company culture. Claire remained a steady presence, guiding him when decisions were tough and celebrating successes quietly by his side. Their relationship blossomed naturally, full of subtle touches, meaningful glances, and shared understanding rather than dramatic declarations. Ethan often reflected on Margaret's challenge, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Her resistance had forced him to confront doubts, to examine his motivations, and to find confidence in himself. It had been a harsh lesson in the power of belief and the importance of self-assurance. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan and Claire stayed in the office late, overlooking the city. The lights shimmered like stars below, and the hum of the city was a comforting backdrop. Claire spoke quietly, leaning slightly against the window. "You've done more than prove yourself, Ethan. You've honored your uncle's vision, and you've done it without losing yourself." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him. He realized that success was no longer measured by numbers, ownership, or recognition. It was measured by the people who stood with him, the trust he upheld, and the life he was building for himself and those he cared about. As they watched the night deepen, Ethan understood one final truth. Inheritance wasn't only about wealth or business. Some legacies are written on paper, yes, but the most important legacies are written in the heart. Trust, loyalty, understanding, and love were far more enduring than any will. He turned to Claire and smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The challenge had been real, the journey difficult, but he had emerged stronger. Margaret's attempt to question his place had inadvertently clarified it. He wasn't just a shareholder or a temporary guest in the family story. He was part of a legacy defined not by blood, but by courage, dedication, and heart. And in that quiet moment, overlooking the city that had witnessed so much of his struggle and triumph, Ethan realized he was ready not just to lead the company, but to embrace a life full of purpose, connection, and the possibility of love. The rain had stopped, leaving streets shining and streets reflecting light, and Ethan felt that same clarity in himself. The storm of doubt and uncertainty had passed, leaving him standing stronger, wiser, and ready to write the next chapter. Some inheritances, he thought, are written in the heart, and those are the ones that truly last forever.